Good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Chase, and you're not. Congressman. I do want to warn you that the last group I talked to, I performed laser surgery accidentally in the front row of the person sitting in that seat. But seriously, thank you for having me here this evening, and Mr. President, the same also. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about some of the issues that I think probably are of a lot of concern to people. So I'll try to address some of the issues, and then maybe they'll generate some questions afterward. We're happy to talk about that. I'd like to start out with a slide showing you what drilling was like in the early 1900s. We've made it to the 2000s, and we've come a long way. All of the wells that you see in that picture were wooden structures. Most of the wells were drilled on a 1 acre spacing or less. If you had a plot of ground, you could put a hole in the ground, and you could get oil and gas out of these wells. And if you were happened to be working on a rig next to someone who was a smoker, and his well came in and caught on fire, all the wells in that picture would have been gone in a flash. And that was not an uncommon thing to see. But it was also what led to the advent of good drilling practices and good spacing practices like we have here in Ohio. Ohio is really blessed with some people that have had real foresight in our Department of Natural Resources in terms of putting spacing requirements in, and in terms of putting regulations in that do protect the environment in more ways than most states, most of the surrounding states like Pennsylvania and West Virginia. I'd like to start out showing you what it was like just 3 years ago here in the state of Ohio. If we take a tract of land, and I'm sorry I can't use the pointer on the other side too, I guess I can. A tract of land that's 1,280 acres, that's the equivalent of 2 square miles. 3 years ago, companies like Enervest would have approached drilling in a very different way. They would have come in, and the state requires it for the wells that are 7,000 to 8,000 feet deep, like the Utica Point Pleasant wells. You needed 40 acres of property on which to drill a vertical well, and that vertical well would have been drilled and hydraulically fractured. And it would have taken 32 wells to drain that 1,280 acre tract per unit. You can see in the picture what all those vertical wells would look like. Each of these wells would have required about a 2 acre pad for the drilling rig, for the producing well, and for the tank batteries once the well was done. Each well would have required lease roads. Each well would have required pipelines or gathering lines. And you would have had a very, very complex picture here after those 32 wells had been drilled, and a lot of the land would have been impacted. The advent of horizontal drilling and multi-stage hydraulic fracturing has changed all that, and the way we go about business in the development of the Utica Point Pleasant Shale. And you can see here, this is the same 1,280 acre tract right there. And now we put a single pad of about 4 to 5 acres. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the center, but it's easier to show it there. We put a 4 to 5 acre pad somewhere on that tract, and from that single tract, we can drill 8 wells, and with just 8 horizontal wells, we can accomplish what those 32 wells that I showed in the last picture were able to accomplish. And in fact, they're even more efficient and more productive than the 32 wells that were there shown in the previous slide. Each of these represents an individual well, and I'll show you a slide later about how these wells are drilled, what they look like on a location, because literally the drilling rig can drill a well, and then that rig will move 15 to 20 feet and drill another completely separate well, and then move 15 to 20 feet, and that process is repeated until essentially you put 8 wells on that 1,280 acre unit. Now, looking at it from an underground picture, and we saw one slide that Jim showed you just a little while ago, our aquifers are very shallow in Ohio, usually 100 to 200 feet. And how many of you in the room have water wells, out of curiosity? It's about half the room, okay? So obviously, companies are as concerned as you are about taking care of the groundwater. And they go about doing that in several ways. Number one, they have to meet state regulations which are very strict about the way wells are completed through the groundwater. Number two, they go beyond that. They exceed the standards that the state mandates because they don't want to have a problem. So typically what we see is as many as 5 different protective layers of casing and cement through the freshwater zone down to the depth, usually below the deepest, some of the deeper producing formations in the state, especially saltwater producing formations. And every single string of pipe that goes through there is usually cemented in place, most of the time back to the surface. So you might have as many as 3 sets of casing or pipe, 3 layers of cement, at least 2 layers of cement, so 5 to 6 layers of protection through your freshwater zone. Once that's all said and done, and the horizontal borehole is drilled, then another layer of pipe is running to that hole from top to bottom. It's cemented in place back up inside that lowest casing string, that lowest vertical casing string, which we call an intermediate casing string. So again, anything that happens down here can't get back up through this pipe, through the pipe and through the cement that is protecting that well bore. You can see on the other side here, a typical vertical well probably would only have 2 layers, 3 layers of protection at the most of it, and then hydraulically fractured at the bottom as well. Here we see in the horizontal, we see vertical fractures that have been created, and they usually stay, again, this is not the scale, this is about a 5.5-inch casing in an 8.5-inch borehole, and these fractures will extend several hundred feet from top to bottom, well below the 7,000 feet it takes to get back to the surface, and I'll talk more about that too in a little bit. A few frac facts, just some stats that I can put up there on the board for you. It's absolutely necessary to make these wells produce. Shale is a rock. You've all seen shale, whether you realize it or not. A lot of road cuts we go through have shale. It's a very, very low porosity, low permeability rock. That means that it doesn't hold a lot of oil and gas, and it doesn't allow the oil and gas to flow through it very easily. But when you look at a road cut, you'll also notice that there are a lot of natural cracks and fractures in the rock. And what we do when we hydraulically frac the rock is we connect a lot of those fractures, natural fractures that are in the rock, so that the gas and oil that is in those natural fractures can flow into the fractures that we create ourselves. This is a typical well site like you're going to see around Ohio. This is a rig. They're very large structures, but what I want you to notice here, this is a Carroll County well site. You'll notice that this entire location has been diked. There is a dike around this entire location. The dike itself is about 3 to 4 feet high in this area, and I'll show you what they do with that dike in the entire location in additional slides. Protecting the groundwater starts with that location. It starts with people coming out and putting down a seam, a plastic mat that is seamed together. Basically, it's like welding plastic, and it's designed to protect the entire location. Around each piece of equipment on location, anywhere there are fluids being used, you're going to find that the large companies that are in Ohio today, like Anadarko Petroleum, Chesapeake, Chevron, Hess, Exxon, XTO, all these companies are much more careful about the way they do business in the state. They are trying to protect the groundwater. They're trying to protect the environment because they don't want problems either. So you'll see that around all of their tanks, drilling fluid pits, and things like that they have on location, they will have an additional mat underlaying the equipment and a dike around all of that equipment as well. And again, that's so that if there is a spill, that spill is going to be contained from that individual unit. If they have compressors on location, they have the compressors. The rig itself is completely diked around it and plastic underlay under that as well. So here we see a better picture of it, spill prevention and control. We see the little dike that's filled up around here. It's rubber. The location here, the limestone that you see, overlays that mat that I showed you in a previous film where they were seaming it together. So you've got a layer of protection, a layer of limestone, another layer of protection. 3 layers of protection just on the surface alone in most of these stations. All these locations have to accommodate heavy equipment for the cement jobs and frac jobs that are going on. So we see pieces of equipment like this being used, and I'll show